Hello everybody, Drake Havoc here, finally back with a new video. Now, if you're a gamer on the internet, then you're no doubt well aware of just how close we are to E3, and if you're anything like me, you're probably salivating at the prospect. For Nintendo fans in particular, this E3 is especially tantalizing due to the simple fact that Smash Bros. Is guaranteed to be shown off. There's so many fantastic possibilities that Nintendo can bring to the E3 table this year that practically everyone has something to be excited about, even without Smash Bros. But just how likely are these possibilities? Well, I really don't know. But I think I can make several educated guesses, which of course is the whole point of this video, where I'm going to list my predictions for what I think Nintendo will and will not show off this year. Before we get started, I want to note that these predictions will not take any current rumors or leaks into account. I may reference them, but they will not influence my predictions beyond any "what if it's real" hypotheticals. But that's enough preamble, so let's dive into the thick of it, by which I mean, let's start by talking about the one thing we know will show up: Smash Bros. Now, there's no point in predicting Smash Bros. Will be at E3, since this is already 100% guaranteed by Nintendo themselves. However, we can predict the form in which the reveal will take place, which I believe to be thus. There will be a huge cinematic trailer, starting by either showing off the titles of past Smash games before moving on to the new one, or just showing off the various franchises within the series, much like the Smash 4 trailer/opening did. This trailer will show off the greatest number of new playable characters in a single trailer since the Melee reveal trailer/opening of E3 2001, which for quick reference was a whopping 7 characters total. However, like the Brawl trailer, these characters will all be highlighted as newcomers specifically, unlike the Melee trailer that left the situation ambiguous and thus got people thinking Ridley and Samurai Goro would be playable when they were not. And speaking of Ridley, that's another prediction I have to make. Ridley will be shown off in this trailer as a playable character. Now, I have genuine reasons for predicting this beyond simply wanting Ridley that I would love to espouse here, but that's not what this video is about, so instead I'll make an additional prediction just to temper my own expectations and avoid getting myself too hyped. If Ridley does not appear at E3, then he will not be playable at all, because I really can't think of any other reason to not show off a playable Ridley at E3. After this trailer is finished, Nintendo will move on to provide more general information, such as features, modes, and at least a release month, if not a full release date, before moving on from Smash. But before I move on, I'm going to make one more prediction regarding the information we receive. We will be teased about a single-player campaign, but it will not be fully revealed before the game is released. Now, I can't say if this campaign will be more like Melee's Adventure, Brawl's Subspace, 3DS's Run, or something else entirely, but I definitely think we will be teased about it, without getting a full-blown reveal. Alright, that's enough of Smash. Now let's move on to the other things Nintendo may or may not show off, starting with the latter. As much as it pains me to say this, I honestly do not believe that Metroid Prime 4, Animal Crossing, or Pikmin 4 will be shown off this year. For Metroid, it's pretty easy to say why, as the game was only revealed just last year, which means Nintendo is likely to avoid discussing it this year to keep speculation going, and also to keep attention on games that are getting released sooner. As for Animal Crossing and Pikmin 4 though, well, I think Nintendo is focusing on the Animal Crossing phone app at the moment, so they may not see a need to announce a Switch game just yet. I do think one is coming, mind, I just don't think we'll see it at E3. Pikmin 4, however, just seems to have been in development for way too long. How long has it been since Pikmin 3 again? With how long Nintendo has been hinting and teasing at the game's existence, I'm more convinced that Pikmin 4 is actually vaporware or is just entering early development, and either way it means Nintendo has nothing to show. Maybe we'll get a teaser like Prime 4, but I doubt it. Now, I also expect Pokémon to not really make an appearance during the presentation itself, despite the fact that it's been confirmed that Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee will be on the show floor to be demoed. It just doesn't seem like a game that needs to be talked about in the presentation itself though, since we already got a pretty lengthy trailer for it along with consistent updates on the mechanics of the game from the developers. Combine that with the demo that the media and word of mouth will pass on to those who can't play it, and I really don't see Pokemon taking up any time in the presentation. I could be wrong though, we'll see. But that's enough of that. Let's talk about what Nintendo will show. First up will be the 3DS games, and there probably won't be too much to show on that front. We'll probably get a release date for Luigi's Mansion and WarioWare Gold, but beyond that I just expect to see 3 games. A brand new game that could be anything from something weird like Sushi Striker to an Uprising-esque entry to a long-dormant retro series like the mysterious Murasame Castle, and 2 enhanced remakes of a couple of classic and/or beloved games. One of these games will almost certainly be a remake of an old 2D Zelda game using the Link Between Worlds engine, and though the most likely candidate for such a remake is A Link to the Past, I could also see Link's Awakening or even the very first Zelda game getting the spit shine instead. I feel this will happen because Nintendo has made bank with their other 3DS Zelda remakes in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, so I can easily see them continuing the trend with the existing Link Between Worlds engine and similarly beloved 2D Zelda games. The other remake, however, I'm not so sure about, so I shall offer 2 likely possibilities and 2 incredibly unlikely ones. The first possibility is a remake of Super Mario Land, the first Mario game for the original Game Boy and the one where the character Daisy first appeared. This would likely utilize the new Super Mario Bros. 3DS engine, as well as add in a few more worlds to search for Daisy in, because the original game was actually quite short by Mario standards. The other game I consider a likely possibility is a remake of either one or both of the Fire Emblem Jug Drill games, those being Genealogy of the Holy War and Thracia 776. And if it's both of them, then it'll just be a single compilation title. Let's face it, Nintendo wants to make Fire Emblem successful, so doing a remake of the Jug Drill games, considered some of the best from what I've heard, would be a smart move on all fronts, especially since several Jug Drill characters are apparently MVPs in Fire Emblem Heroes. Now for the unlikely possibilities. Mother 3 and both Golden Sun games, again as a compilation. Yeah, I don't expect it either. Anyways, now let's talk about the Switch games that Nintendo will bring. First and foremost, and quite annoyingly, Mario Tennis Aces will not be out by the time of E3, giving Nintendo the opportunity to talk about it again for entirely too long, despite how soon it will release, which they will most definitely do. The only thing I can say to this is, I hope they at least give more details about the story mode. Next, with or without a companion Jug Drill remake, Fire Emblem Switch will finally make its debut. I'm also going to predict that, like Fates, the game will be split up into 3 stories and 2 games, with a third special edition available to anyone who can manage to pre-order before the incredibly limited supply is sold out. I predict this because, A, it worked pretty well for Fates from what I've heard, so I see no reason why Nintendo won't take the same approach again, and B, even when talking about good things, I have to take the pessimistic train of thought whenever able. God, I hope I'm wrong on this detail. Next, we'll get some information about the new Yoshi game, including a name and release date, and we'll probably get some amiibo functionality as well, like what we got with Yoshi's Woolly World. Finally, we'll also get an announcement of at least 1, maybe 2, of the following 4 potential Wii U ports: Super Mario Maker, Xenoblade Chronicles X, The Wonderful 101, and Tokyo Mirage Sessions. Now I expect we'll get all of these games on the Switch at some point, but for now I expect at most 2 of them to appear, and in my opinion the most likely one to show up will be Super Mario Maker, for what I feel are fairly obvious reasons, with the second most likely being The Wonderful 101. This is because Platinum has expressed interest in porting the game over, and the team that did the port for Bayonetta is probably free to start working on 101, while Atlus is busy with Shin Megami Tensei 5, and Monolith only just finished up work on Xenoblade 2, and they're still working on the story expansion DLC, so I view Platinum as being in the best position to finish their port first. Oh, and speaking of DLC, that's one more thing Nintendo will show off. There will of course be the Octo expansion for Splatoon 2, which will likely get a release date, and I would be surprised if the Xenoblade 2 story expansion doesn't at least get teased. But I also expect DLC announcements for 2 more games, Kirby Star Allies and Super Mario Odyssey. Now I don't expect much of an announcement for Kirby. At most, there will be a release date for the upcoming Dream Friends pack and an announcement of the 3rd character for said pack. For Mario, however, I expect a full DLC expansion pass, with multiple DLC packs that each contain a new kingdom, a new collection of moons to grab, and a kingdom-appropriate boss to fight in a kingdom-specific storyline. I also expect at least one of these kingdoms to be Delfino Island, one of the most iconic locations from Mario history that Nintendo knows fans would be willing to spend even more money to dive into again. The other worlds would be brand new, though I would not be surprised if one turned out to be the Ruined Kingdom before it became ruined, via some sort of magic device placed in front of the Lord of Lightning once the DLC is installed. And I guess I should mention the online service that Nintendo may give more details about during their show before moving on from the first-party stuff. But honestly, I don't expect much more beyond a solid release date and maybe a few more details. Hopefully about whatever it is they're replacing Virtual Console with. But I feel the bulk of the information about this service will be revealed closer to September when the service is actually launching, so anything shown off here will likely just be a holdover until then. Okay, so that's all Nintendo will bring. Maybe. But now let's move on to predicting what third-party companies will bring to the N-shaped table. Starting off, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that we'll be seeing a Team Sonic Racing trailer from Sega, though I also expect this trailer to be one shown earlier at E3 during Sony or Microsoft's conferences, and there won't be much more to show aside from possibly some small amiibo functionality exclusive to the Switch version. We'll probably also see just what Genesis games Sega will be putting on the eShop first, with maybe a hint to future games from other Sega platforms like the Saturn and Dreamcast. We'll probably see something from Capcom as well, even if it's just more Mega Man 11 info, though I would also bet on seeing something from Street Fighter 2 just because of how much Street Fighter they've already pumped into the Switch so far. Next is Namco, and with the success of Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2 on the Switch, I have no doubt that they'll announce a port of Fighter Z, regardless of whether that one so-called leak is real or fake. Square Enix will also show up, mostly to get in one last showing of Octopath Traveler before it's released, but I also wouldn't be surprised if we were to get a release date for The World Ends With You, as well as more information on Dragon Quest XI, hopefully localization? The other big JRPG company, Atlus, will probably show off more of Shin Megami Tensei 5, since it's been about a year and a half since the initial announcement, with almost no new info in between. I'm going to make one additional prediction regarding Atlus though, and that's that an enhanced port of Persona 5 will be coming to the Switch sometime next year, in the same vein as Persona 3 Portable and Persona 4 Golden, with an additional story scenario not present in the initial release. I think it makes sense to release this sort of update on the Switch rather than the Vita again, since the Switch is making a killing worldwide, and bringing the game to the Switch means it will reach a wider audience than what releasing it for the Vita would do, since most people outside Japan who own a Vita probably already also own a PS4 and can just pick up Persona 5 right now anyways. Moving on from Atlus, I also think it's reasonable that Platinum Games may have something to show off, since they seem pretty buddy-buddy with Nintendo. Now, I think this will just be the Wonderful 101 port I mentioned earlier, as I think it's still too early to show off more of Bayonetta 3, and it's unlikely Platinum has any other games in the works specifically for Nintendo. That said, I do think Bayonetta 3 has a better chance of making an appearance than Nintendo's own Metroid Prime 4, so we'll just have to see where the chips fall on that one. Next, let's talk Konami. Good talk. Now let's move on to some Western developers who may have something to show for Nintendo, whether at their press conference or Nintendo's, starting with EA. That sounds about right. A company I do think will have something to show, however, is Ubisoft. And I'm not just talking about a release date for the Mario plus Rabbids DLC, though I expect that to undoubtedly appear at some point. I'm going to predict that Red Steel 3 will make an appearance at E3 this year. Now this might seem like an odd thing to predict, as the first Red Steel had a mixed reception and the second, while received much better, didn't sell as well. However, I think that with the Switch, Ubisoft will be willing to give the series one more shot. After all, the Switch would be the perfect fit for a new Red Steel game, as the dual Joy-Cons would allow a player to wield both gun and sword at the same time, without having specific segments for each like in the first game, or even having to swap between one or the other in the second. In short, it's a unique opportunity to create a similarly unique experience with the perfect IP that already exists, and I find it unlikely that Ubisoft won't take the chance they now have. Of course, I could easily be wrong, but we'll see in the end. Next, let's talk about Bethesda, who, like Square Enix, will likely want to show off their upcoming Wolfenstein port one last time before its release. I would also expect at least one new announcement for the Switch, due to the success of both Skyrim and Doom already, which I have no doubt convinced Bethesda to continue supporting the system. Now, whether that announcement ends up being a brand new game, or another port of a previously released game, I can't say. Now, while I don't expect Activision to show up with Call of Duty on the Switch in any form, I would at least expect a special announcement of the Spyro Trilogy for the Switch. Why this wasn't announced earlier, I have no idea, but we've had a similar situation with Sonic Mania, where the game wasn't initially announced to be for the Switch, even though it was pretty obvious the game would be coming anyways. I think a similar thing is going on here as well, which means this probably has something to do with Nintendo themselves wanting to make the announcement for whatever reason. Personally, I don't see the point of segmenting the announcement like this, but whatever. Expect Spyro. Now that's all the big name companies I can think of that will get announcements, but that's not all I would expect either. No doubt we'll get some release dates on previously announced games like SNK Heroines, and we'll probably get a few other announcements from publishers that aren't as ubiquitous as the guys above. For instance, even before the data mine proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Fortnite would be coming to the Switch, this was a game I had no doubt would show up in some capacity. It's hugely popular, and it can run on freaking mobile devices, so there was no conceivable way it wasn't going to end up on the Switch. And since E3 is the perfect time and place to announce that sort of thing, of course it would make sense to announce it at E3. Another game I would expect to see is Paladins. Or that's what I would have said if it hadn't literally just been announced. I would still expect to see it in the presentation, however, as Nintendo will likely want to get that information out to the wider audience who may not be aware that this is a thing. Plus, the game releases on the day of Nintendo's presentation, so it would be really easy for them to say, here's this really cool game you can go buy after we finish if you want, which isn't an uncommon thing for Nintendo to pull in their directs. Anyways, moving on to the indies. Honestly, there isn't too much to say. We'll be shown a slide reel of indies, some we'll have seen before but now with solid release dates, some of which will already be on other platforms but be making their way to the Switch now, some of which will be entirely new, and we might get special focus on one or two of them like Travis Strikes Again No More Heroes. I'm not going to bother trying to predict what kind of indies we will and won't see beyond No More Heroes, since indie devs and games are so widely different from the normal gaming sphere, but I sincerely hope that Hollow Knight at least will finally get a release date for the Switch. Been waiting for that one for a while. Now I bet you think that I'm done talking about third-party stuff because I finished with indies, right? Wrong. There was one more thing I wanted to say for last, and that is that I expect a collaboration project to be announced. Now, when I say collaboration, I mean a game developed by a third-party studio that utilizes one of Nintendo's most prolific IPs and merges it with a property of the developing studio, in the same vein as Hyrule Warriors and Mario + Rabbids. I say this because, well, Nintendo seems to have been doing this a lot with their IPs lately. In addition to the two games already mentioned, we've also had Tokyo Mirage Sessions and Fire Emblem Warriors, and while these two may not have been met with the same level of success as the above two, they are no doubt indicative of Nintendo's newfound willingness to allow other companies to handle their IPs in new and interesting ways. I have no doubt that Nintendo will continue this trend, with the only questions being who gets to handle their IP and what IPs will be mixed. Personally, I would expect something from Namco Bandai. Well, I think that's all I need to say. Except I feel like I've forgotten something. Oh, what was it? Just one more thing. Oh, right. Those guys. Okay, so Retro Studios is a weird one to talk about. I'm sure you've all heard of the Starfox Grand Prix rumors by now, and if you haven't, well, rumors say that Retro is making a racing game in the vein of Diddy Kong Racing using Starfox characters. It's a bit unbelievable in my honest opinion for multiple reasons, but that's not the point of this video. However, I don't want to just write this rumor off immediately since I am actually intrigued by it, so instead I'm going to approach this from two angles. What if it's real, and what if it's not? If it's real, well then that's probably good news for Starfox. The series has been in desperate need of a good game ever since Command, and if any studio is up for the challenge of revitalizing Starfox, it's probably Retro. I do have to wonder why they didn't just make an F-Zero game, as the mechanics sound like the perfect way to bring something new to a series that Miyamoto felt didn't have anything new to offer. Maybe the game started as an F-Zero one and got shifted to Star Fox mid-development, much like how Kid Icarus Uprising started as a Star Fox game? It would explain the unusually long wait for an announcement, if such a development shift did occur. Regardless, this sort of game would definitely be the one more thing at the end of the presentation, since it's such a strange concept and there's few other places to stick it. They'll probably show off some racers, Team Star Fox of course, with probably at least a few instances of Team Starwolf blasting and getting blasted in turn. If the Diddy Kong Racing thing is true, there would likely be a tease of at least one boss and all the different types of vehicles that you'll use to race around in. Though I admit I never played Diddy Kong Racing and have no idea how it all works, so I can't comment too much on it. Overall though, such a trailer would likely end with a more info at a later date thing, and possibly a release window or even release month if we were to get incredibly spoiled, and we'll all leave the presentation scratching our heads and wondering just WTF it was we saw. That sounds about right. But what if the rumor is false, I hear you ask? Well then I still expect the trailer for whatever Retro is working on to appear as the one more thing. It's been over 4 years since Tropical Freeze first released on the Wii U, so if they don't at least have a trailer for us by now, I will be thoroughly confused/annoyed. But as for what game it will be, well, that's the tricky part. It could be a new IP entirely, in which case I have absolutely no idea what it could possibly be. Or it could be a new entry in one of Nintendo's many franchises. If the latter, then I would expect it to be one that was dormant, suffering, or otherwise just inactive at the time Tropical Freeze was finished. And while you could argue that it could just be another DK game, I don't think so. If that were the case, I think it would have been announced already so that people could get excited for it, while the Tropical Freeze port would be used to soothe the waiting pains. But now that Tropical Freeze is out and there's no Retro DK announcement whatsoever, another DK game just seems incredibly unlikely. So then, what franchises could Retro have possibly been asked to handle? Well, here's a list of the franchises that were in need of games around the time of Tropical Freeze's release. Taking out the ones I find highly unlikely, that leaves us with F-Zero, Kid Icarus, Wave Racer, Custom Robo, and Sin and Punishment. Of these, I find Kid Icarus to be the most likely game that Retro is working on. After all, Sakurai is focused on Smash, and Sora Ltd is no more. Kid Icarus Uprising, however, proved to be a very popular game, and I find it highly shocking and slightly conspicuous that Nintendo has made no attempt to capitalize on that success by pushing the series forward. The fact that we have had no word on the future of the Kid Icarus series despite this makes me think that Nintendo is keeping their plans for the series very, very secret. And what other studio has been unusually secretive? Retro. I find it highly likely that we will see a new Kid Icarus game for the Switch, developed by Retro Studios, which will likely be a far more expansive game than even Uprising was. It may be open world, or it may take after its sister series and be a 3D Metroidvania, or it may be something entirely different. But however it pans out, I believe that Nintendo intends to push the Kid Icarus series hard and is using Retro Studios to make this great push forward. And we will discover all this at the tail end of the Nintendo E3 presentation. Only time will tell if I'm correct, of course, but fortunately we don't have too much longer to wait. And with that, I am officially finished with my predictions for what Nintendo will reveal at this year's E3. Of course, there's no way everything I've said here will turn out to be true, but that's part of the fun of making these predictions. By getting it all out there, I get to compare my expectations to reality once it's all over and have a laugh at how I was absolutely blindsided by everything when nothing I predict comes true, or revel in my near psychic levels of intuition and deductive logic when I'm right on every single account. Or I fall somewhere in the middle and I still enjoy it all. It won't be too much longer now, everyone. Here's hoping E3 will be as fantastic as we all hope. This is Drake Havoc, bidding you a good day and an amazing week. Ta!